Collins,
Here.
Mr. Scrivano,
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Jude, is your mic on?
Mrs. McCulloch. I'll mark her as present.
Okay. Okay. We can see her. That's a good sign.
Mr. Siegel,
Here.
Mr. Connor,
Here.
Ms. Stanford. Here. With 6 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we start each board meeting, it bears reminding that the mission of Rockford Public Schools is to collaboratively engage all students in a first-class education for a changing world. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Connor and Rod, who are working behind the scenes to produce our board's broadcast on Zoom and YouTube and all of those good things. So we will now move to public comments, where we are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting, when we invite the public to make comments. Oh, I jumped ahead. I'm sorry. Let me back up. So we have a set aside time. I don't have notes on that, but set aside time for any public hearing on e-learning plan. Are there anyone that wanted to speak on that? Okay. Don't see anyone, so we'll go ahead now. And this is a time where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the right of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portion of our agenda. According to Board Policy 2.230, the public comments portion of the meeting is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in efficient and effective manner, we are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. I will call your names. We have a clock to help you. And we thank you for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. We have 2 speakers tonight, and Mel, I'm going to have you go first. Mel Gillifen.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Ken?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. First of all, I'm Mel Gilfillan, the REA president. I'd like to thank the board for the decision to take the adaptive pause, given that the metrics in Winnebago County were very alarming. We'd like to have our members have a choice to be able to work from the building or remotely, not just because of the infection rate, but for several other reasons. Governor Pritzker has asked us, as good citizens of Illinois, that if we can work remotely, we should be. This is a direct way we can help flatten the curve and slow the spread of COVID. We were told early that there was no school spread. We know now that Spring Creek has been named as a school with an outbreak amongst adults. We don't want to see this happen again. The district now has a much more robust remote learning plan than we did in the spring. We've learned from our past experiences and have had 9 months to improve on remote learning. Surrounding districts at both Harlem and Belvedere are allowing for this choice. We appreciate the fact that the district has given our members permission to bring their children to school with them so they don't have to be left at home alone. But for some families, bringing children into a school setting with other students in the midst of a pandemic is not an ideal circumstance. I think it's important to point out, too, that we've spent millions of dollars preparing for remote learning in equipment and in training. And it's time to put all that preparation to the test. Allowing our members the choice to work from the building or from home will give us a chance to see if all that hard work pays off. This is really the best solution for all, to allow that flexibility, so those who need to can work from home, making the buildings available to those who prefer to work there, and minimize everyone's exposure to the virus while continuing to provide the very best educational opportunities we can during these very difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Christy Malway. Christy? Christy, can you hear me? Oh, that's Ann Noble, okay. We don't have Christy on then? Well, let's check with Connor. Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, so we are now on to board member comments. Are there any board member comments at this time? Seeing none?
Actually, you can.
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Siegel.
I can't pass up the time to express my condolences to the family of Mike Padron and Nicole Padron. This is a very difficult time, some crushing grief, and you're very much certainly on our minds.
Any other board member comments? Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
Thank you, Mr. Scrivano and Board of Education, and I too want to echo Mr. Siegel's comments, our concerns about the loss of a loved one with one of our faculty members, and that's something we're all certainly thinking about and keeping in mind during this very, very difficult time. So thank you for raising that, Mr. Siegel, and I certainly echo that sentiment on behalf of the administrative team as well. What I would like to discuss this evening is the second in a series of year-long reports regarding our system-wide framework for improvement. I will keep coming back to this Venn diagram as a reminder of what all will be embedded in this. We are looking as a board to spend the year rebuilding and improving this accountability system. At the center is accountability. One circle is quality. We have a quality peer review process that we're going to be taking a look at. We have a scorecard tool that's going to be the focus of this evening's conversation, and a standards of practice and service tool that we will be building. As we look at the second slide, I forgot to turn you can see again that we'll be emphasizing the school scorecard. Now, we will come back to the school scorecard again next month, so that'll be very shortly, in December 8th, and spend some time talking about how we can improve the scorecard. But Mrs. Detman and I, Jeff Lowry and the team, and the accountability team, Brooke Peterson, we've all spent a lot of time working on what do we do with the existing school scorecard in the context of a pandemic. And what you can see on the next slide is what happens to our quality instruction, climate and culture, and fiscal and operational stewardship measurements. And what you can see is there are a number of items that we still are able to measure, but there are many, many more items that we really don't have a good apples to apples comparison. So what I am going to be recommending to the board is recommendation number one, that we update the available measures, use NA where not available, and that we really don't attempt to do a big summative designation this year. I think injecting accountability, high stakes accountability into this climate would be challenging, to say the least, and attempting to kind of use some mathematical wizardry to combine previous numbers, I think would be a difficult sell, to say the least. So our suggestion of these five is again to do option one. We'll update what we have, but you can see there are things like the spring map, IAR, PSAT, SAT that we just aren't going to have for this year. And we are going to use this time to build the accountability system, and specifically starting in December 8th, spend some time talking about what we can do to improve the scorecard in the future, assuming we can use all of the metrics, because we've gotten some feedback from the board from last year that we wanted to see this improved. So what you can expect in the December is scorecard discussions for school year 2021 and beyond, and starting the process of introducing and exposing to the QPR. So again, you'll keep hearing from me and team members all year. This is going to be one of our CEO-centric targets that we're going to be working on, is building this system so that we can really improve accountability. And I want to do it month by month so that we break this into manageable, bite-sized conversations. This is too big to try to work all the way up to the end and do all at once. So any questions on the plan for this current school year, which is essentially option 1, which is to basically use not available for the vast number of things, and to not aggregate the scores, and to start moving forward once we have good apples to apples numbers with the revisions of the scorecard moving forward.
Any board member comments or questions on that? I just wanted to ask one, and that is, assuming that we do IAR in the spring, we would not have those results until late summer
That's
or early
correct.
fall
That's right.
of next year, right?
So that would allow us to do next year,
Right.
to inject that into next year's scorecard. At this time, we have not received any indication that we will receive federal relief like we did last spring. So as of now, I am planning on us giving all of those assessments, but I'll let the board know if anything changes.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to report and action items that proceeded through the Performance Monitoring Committee. Mrs. McCullough, do you have anything to report on that?
Good evening, Mr. Scrivano. I was looking, there's a consent item with the Park District. Am I missing it on here, guys? The one,
It's
oh, here it is. I'm
10J.
sorry, J. Yeah, 10J, which sort of came through our committee, but it didn't make it in a timely manner. We wanted to get it to the board so that they could start right away, but I'm just going to confirm that if these are for some after-school services and support and tutoring, and I wanted to confirm that we would now not even be able to start that until after the new year, when there is a clause in there that talks about providing services remotely, but since we didn't even connect with the students before this point, before they left the building, I would like to ascertain that wouldn't start until after the new year, or whenever it is we're back in person.
I can't speak to those details specifically, but given that there is an opportunity for remote, and we do have some of our students already being supported through the Park District, I would not count it out as a possibility if they already have contact in another way.
And this is considered a recurring contract because it's with the Park District, and we have other contracts with them, but we don't have one such as this in place, correct?
I believe this is unique to Ellis.
Okay. And they will be using their Title I funds for that?
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to bring that one to the attention. Everything else that we talked about at the last two meetings, I think, has cleared the docket for my committee for now.
Okay. Thank you. Move on then to the Planning and Development Committee items. Mrs. Yar, are you making a presentation tonight with?
No, Ann Noble's gonna go ahead and take us through the facilities
Okay.
sales tax. So she'll be sharing her screen.
Alrighty.
Good evening, everybody.
Okay. We hear
Nice.
you, but we don't see you.
There we go. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop my video. Let's see here. I think somebody there needs to start my video. It won't let me start.
Okay. There you are. We got you now.
All right.
Hi, Ann.
How are you?
Okay, good.
All right. Well, it's good to see all of you. Let's see if we can get this running here. There we go. All right. Can you guys see that?
Got it.
All right. And can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right. We got to love technology when it works, right? All right. I know a number of you have seen this presentation a number of times, but not all of you have. So I'm going to just try to hit the high points in interest of your time. So I am going to skip over and skim over some of the slides and then take your questions. So if I skip over something, obviously please redirect me back. So this presentation is on the county school facilities sales tax. It is exactly what it says. It is a sales tax that can be used for school facility purposes with a couple of small exceptions. It can be voted in up to a 1% tax in quarter% increments. So that's a penny on every dollar of sales if you voted up to the 1% maximum. The law's been in effect now for about 13 years. The law was amended a year or so ago and this would be different from the last time I talked to you guys about this. You now can use special ballot language that allows you to use sales tax revenue to pay for school resource officers and mental health professionals if you wish. There is otherwise no provision in the law, which I will go through in a minute, to use the money for any salaries of any type. This would be the one exception, and it only applies if you use that version of the ballot language. This is the current map of where the sales tax is in effect. So all the green counties have the tax. So we have 57 counties, more than half the state. You can obviously see the collar counties are the big blank. Most of them have never voted it, Kendall being the only collar county that has attempted it. So you can see 57 with it and 23 counties where it has been attempted but failed. What is taxed? I like to call this a Walmart tax. Anything you can buy at Walmart is taxed except for unprepared foods, so pure grocery items like a loaf of bread or a can of tomatoes. Those are not taxed, but if you bought food at the deli counter that was prepared, that would be taxed. And medicine of any sort is not taxed. Other key large ticket items are not taxed so that people are not incented to leave the county to make a purchase, specifically registered vehicles of any sorts, cars, trucks, boats, etc. And many things related to farming are also not taxed, and services are also not taxed. And at this point, internet sales are not taxed. The state has not figured out how to implement that on local sales tax. This slide highlights for you what you're allowed to use the revenue for, but it can be pretty clearly put in the bucket of if it is a long-term school facility capital improvement project, you can use the money to fund it. So any new construction, renovation, anything that would qualify as a health life safety project, you can use these monies for, but you aren't required to get the ROE approvals like you do for health life safety projects. You can fund architectural planning, you can buy land, you can do demolition, and then as I noted, you now can fund SROs and mental health professionals if you use the right ballot language. And then lastly, you can abate your property tax levy or pay off bonds that you have previously issued for school improvement or construction purposes. the right-hand side highlights what you can't use it for, which would include basically anything that falls into your operating budget bucket. All salaries and overhead. You can't buy buses, you can't buy laptops or other PDAs, but you can use the funds, for example, to improve your technology infrastructure in your buildings so that your Wi-Fi works better and there's better remote access and so on and so forth. How are you allowed to use the sales tax? You can kind of handle it one of three ways, and you can do any combination of these that you want. And every district in the county gets to make this choice for themselves. So you can pay as you go capital projects. So the revenue you receive every year, you just simply spend on projects typically in the summer. You can issue bonds that are called alternate revenue bonds that are secured by the sales tax as the alternate revenue source, as opposed to levying for them on your property tax. Or you can use them to pay off existing bonds that you have sold previously, as I already mentioned. Two potential benefits to property taxes related to the sales tax, and that is that you can directly reduce your property tax, as we mentioned, by paying off or abating current bonds that are already outstanding. Or you can avoid the future issuance of bonds because now you have the sales tax revenue to start taking on some of that deferred maintenance work that perhaps you're just letting stack up. This would give you a revenue stream to start addressing that, as opposed to needing to issue a large bond issue to fund it at some point in the future. As relates to your tax caps, I just like to highlight that this has no impact on tax caps. It is outside of your aggregate extension base calculation. It also has no impact on evidence-based funding calculations. And the bonds issued were you to pursue that option. Alternate revenue bonds do not fall under your debt service extension base, which is essentially your tax cap related to your bonds. So this revenue really sits on its own outside of the whole PTEL calculation. So revenue distribution on this, it is a county-wide tax. So every district in the county will receive the same amount of revenue per pupil. So the revenue gets distributed based on students that actually reside in Winnebago County and attend a public school. So private or parochial schools will not receive this revenue, nor is there any possibility under the way the law is written for you to share the revenue with them, even were you to wish to arrange such a thing. So it's a per pupil number for every student in the county. And every district gets their revenue based on the number of students they have who live in the county. It doesn't matter if the school building they attend is in the county. It's all about where the student lives. That becomes a challenge for us to do our calculations for you, to show you projections, because ISB doesn't track students by where they live. They just track them by district. So the only way for us to do the calculation for you on revenue estimates is based on EAV and the percentage of EAV that a district has in the county. And for you guys, you're almost all in Winnebago County, so the math for you is very straightforward. But you'll see on the next slide, there are a lot of districts that that's not necessarily true for. And we are using their EAV simply to estimate their enrollment So if we show that 60% of their EAV is in Winnebago County, we assume that 60% of their enrollment is in Winnebago County. But that is obviously not always true. So if you were to actually move forward with wanting to put this on the ballot, we would pursue the actual enrollment numbers from each district and come up with more firm projections across the county. I know you won't be able to see this on the screen, at least not the big screen. Hopefully you have it in front of you on your smaller laptop screens. But what this shows you are all of the districts that have any portion of their tax base in Winnebago County. So you'll see the 3 down at the bottom, Meridian, North Boone, and Hiawatha. They all have small portions of their EAV in Winnebago County, so they potentially would receive some revenue from this depending on how many students they have living in the county. But most of the districts in Winnebago County are very close to being 100% in the county. In fact, your amount outside of the county is simply a rounding error, so it shows your percent of EAV being 100% in the county, even though it is slightly under that, but not much. So if you follow your line across there, we are only using your EAV to estimate enrollment. Otherwise, your EAV is irrelevant. So your enrollment based on the fall housing report is 26,304, which represents about 62% of the enrollment in the county. And what that means is you would receive 62% of the revenue. And every year that distribution would change based on your slice of the enrollment pie. So if your enrollment is increasing as a percent of the overall county, your revenue will increase as a percent of the county and vice versa. So the total revenue pot for the county is $26,753,000. You can see at the bottom of column 8. And your percentage of that, or your portion of that, is about $16.5 million. That's based on the full 1% tax. This is 100% pro rata. So if you wanted to say, we don't want to vote 1%, we want to vote 0.5%, well, then you would receive $8,250,000, more or less. And then over to the right, we show you what the value of the abatement would be if you wanted to use this to pay off any of the district's current bonds. That is reflected for you there. If we paid off all of the district's current bond payment using sales tax revenue, it would result in about 60 cents of property tax relief. And you can see the history of the tax down on the bottom of the slide and what the percent change has been over time. It's sales tax, so it is volatile, and you'll see that so far for 2020 the revenues are down about 5%, which isn't bad actually compared to some of the counties we work with. We have seen bigger drops this year due to COVID. That just simply represents the fact that the sales tax base in Winnebago County is more essential services, so people are still using those items despite the pandemic. All right, so how do you place this before voters? In 100% reality in Winnebago County, the way it gets put on the ballot is for you, the Board of Education of Rockford 205, to vote to put it on the ballot, because you represent 62% of the enrollment in the county. And you'll see the second bullet point here says school boards representing more than 50% have to pass the resolution. So that's you. Every other district in the county could choose to pass a resolution to put this on the ballot, and it wouldn't go on the ballot without you taking the action, because we have to get over 50% in order for it to go on the ballot. This is the ballot language that goes on the ballot. It's not super attractive. It's very technical, and we can't change it. It is written in the statute, so this is what we have to work with. So when we work with districts pursuing this, we always emphasize that you need to share this ballot language ahead of time with your voters, because otherwise they quite frankly won't necessarily recognize this as being, quote, the school sales tax, because it doesn't even say school until the third to last word. If you wanted to use the version to allow for SROs and mental health professionals, there is a slightly revised version of ballot language we have to use. And then it simply takes a simple majority voter approval all across the county. It doesn't need to pass in every district. And after voter approval, we just need county certification and so on. And then some paperwork gets filed with the Department of Revenue, and then the tax does go into effect. And the timing of that depends on the election cycle, and I'll show you that in a minute. I do always like to make this point on slide 15 that this revenue stream is not subject to appropriation from the General Assembly. So I do like to emphasize that this is not like the lottery. There's no opportunity for the General Assembly to allocate you this money in lieu of evidence-based funding, for example. This money is restricted for school facility purposes. It is not interchangeable with funding that is meant for teacher salaries. And since this money flows directly from local retail sales to the Department of Revenue, and then the Department of Revenue distributes it to the local units of government, in this case, the school sales tax money goes to the Regional Office of Education, and then the ROE distributes it to all of the local school districts. So no involvement from the General Assembly at all on this revenue stream. And we have a lot of, I have a client who made this comment to me once, and it resonated. She said that this revenue stream in her budget was the most reliable revenue stream she had, because everything else had its caveats and question marks, and this one at least was reliable and consistent. The election timelines are highlighted for you here. So the next election cycle is the April 2021 cycle. We don't have a November election in 2021 available to us. So then we go to the primary in 2022, the gubernatorial primary, and then the gubernatorial election in November of 22. The first date there you can see would be the date by which you have to pass your resolution if you wanted to move forward. Although I will say, I mean, we could talk, and we should, if you chose to pursue this. There's a lot to talk about how to communicate this and share with your voters, because it is a unique topic that requires really a different campaign strategy than a lot of things that school districts are used to functioning around. So waiting until these deadlines to start a campaign won't give you enough time. So while this is your technical deadline to get on the ballot, you would certainly want to start work earlier if you wanted to move forward. And then the very last row shows you the date on which you would start to receive revenue. There's a decent amount of lag time to receive revenue, because we can only change the sales tax rate in Illinois twice a year, on July 1 and Jan 1. So depending on when you vote, the November election cycles have almost a year-long lag. The spring cycles, we can move a little more expeditiously. But so that's your timeline for when you would get revenue. So it's not necessarily instant gratification. But once it starts flowing, you get your money every month. Then these next slides are about the campaign considerations, which I don't really think we need to go into today. So in the interest of time, would anybody have questions? Is there anything you'd like me to focus on? Michelle, anything more?
Mr. Rollins?
And when I saw this presentation years ago, when you first gave it to us, you, I think, did a county-by-county overview of what the sales tax was in each county. And I think people are going to ask that question. Do you have that information available? What the current sales tax rate in each county?
I can certainly get that for you, Tim. I mean, it's not county by county because it's actually city by city.
Yeah.
Because every city can set their own rate. So there's a very large degree of variance. But I absolutely can pull that together for you guys, particularly if you would want to give me, clearly the ones in your region would be the ones I would pull, but if there are others you would want to see that would be of interest to you, I can certainly share that with you. Okay. Rockford definitely has one of the higher sales tax numbers. I know we've discussed that in the past, and that is still true.
Okay, thanks.
And this is Jude.
Go ahead, Jude.
I'm sorry, but I don't understand. You can't go to a private school, I get that, yet students who live in the county, as long as they're a student, they're part of the percentage that we get. Is that correct, Ann? I'm not understanding that.
That's right. If you have a student that lives anywhere in Winnebago County and attends Rockford 205, you would receive revenue for them. If we go back to this revenue slide, I know this is...
Right, but what I don't understand is that you didn't differentiate private versus public, and when you looked at the EAV, I mean, the EAV is not going to tell you which, the people who have children in private schools are also paying, taxes on their homes, and so.
Right. Well, if you provided property tax relief from this, those people would obviously get that benefit because they are currently paying property taxes to you. But the private and parochial.
We just lost your audio.
Can you guys still hear me?
No,
now we can.
Just came back. Okay.
Okay. So hold on a second. Let me disconnect my my little network here. I think it's giving me grief. Right, that should make it better. So I'm sorry, Jude, I'm sure I didn't get to finish answering your question. So can you restate for me? Because I don't know what I didn't get to.
So students who live, and is this preschool through high school? Is it yes. Preschool through, okay, even though we don't have to educate preschoolers?
Yeah, ISB does let you count them.
Okay, so preschool through 18 or older, if we have SPED students, I'll assume, are counted as a student in the county as long as they attend the public school, but not if they attend a private school. So somebody has to go through and disaggregate all that information?
No, because they're literally only counting your students and all the students attending the public schools. So that we're literally using ISB's data, and ISB doesn't even have the data for the private and the parochial kids.
Okay, so that makes more sense. I just didn't think it through right. Thank you.
No problem.
So
maybe you could speak to when you...
Go ahead, Jude. Yeah. Go ahead, Jude. Finish.
No, I was going to ask her to speak to when there are multiple school districts for one county, as we saw on that slide, what kind of coordination effort is involved in putting something like this together. I mean, basically we have more than 50%, so if we say yes, we're going to do it, it goes on the ballot. But have you seen or have you experienced resistance by other districts within a county, or do they pretty much all man up and help with the campaign? because they get money too.
That's right. And that is one of the biggest challenges of moving forward with this is the coordination between the districts. Because it is super important that every district do their part, even the district with the smallest enrollment in the county who might feel like they can do nothing because this is Rockford's gig. We're going to let Rockford do all the work. That won't work, or at least it's likely not to work. Because their voters will vote no out of ignorance, because that's human nature, right? If one of us walks up to the polls to vote and we see something that we don't know anything about.
Oh, we lost your audio again, Ann. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Jude, while we're waiting for Ann to come back, I can just say that we currently are the beneficiaries of the Boone County sales tax. That generates us about $100 a month.
Okay.
And it is based on the few students that we do have that are Boone County residents, and the regional office of education is who aggregates that. So I sign a form, and then it goes to our finance team, who happily deposits the check each month. And it does go towards, so that works out really well from a fairness perspective. In Boone County, it's relatively simple. It's North Boone, it is Belvedere, and a teeny little sliver of Rockford. So.
But my point would be, Aaron, that we didn't participate in that, trying to get that passed, even though we had some benefit from it. And so I don't know how the effort is coordinated. Obviously, any sort of campaign has to be done not by any of our school boards, but by a private, I don't know, and I don't know what part Ann and her group plays in helping a group to do something like this. So.
When it's been successful in other counties, my understanding is it has been, as Ann was starting to say, it's a very highly coordinated effort from all of the school districts. She's exactly right that if all of the school districts aren't enthusiastically supporting this, passing a resolution, passing something to support it in their board meeting or talking about it publicly, then it would have very little chance to pass in Winnebago County. It would take a county-wide effort of all the school districts working with their respective constituents.
And your timing, are you saying that April is probably way too soon? Or, this next year for us to be able to get that done, especially with the pandemic and everything else going on, or does it seem reasonable?
I think you would definitely have a lot of work to do. It is not impossible, but you would need to really start the communication work almost immediately.
Mr. Connor, you had a question?
Yeah, what I was going to ask is, looking at the schedule in a similar vein is, are we tonight deciding whether we're going to do this? So the thing that I would say is, intuitively, if we're not voting, which is kind of what I thought, then to make a January deadline would be very problematic, because we'd have to discuss and get this done, I would assume in December, and get people on board. So so that was one, if you will, kind of question. The other thing is that, Ms. Noble, can you say, in your experience, what is the lead time that it takes to appropriately communicate and coordinate before an election? So if an election is in, March of 2022, what's been your experience? How early do people have to really start working on it to have it be successful?
So in my experience in a county your size, the smaller the county, the easier it is to do, right? If there are 3 school districts and, a smaller population center, it is easier to what I call cat herd. the more districts, the more population, the harder the cat herding. So the size of your districts and the population, I would say in an ideal scenario, if you were looking at March of 2021, you would spend between now and next fall, you would spend working with the other districts and coordinating and getting everybody on board that you were going to move forward with this. And then you would kick it off with the start of school, the official putting it on the ballot approval, and then you would start your official communication efforts and a citizens committee, hopefully, that would work on promoting it for you as a vote yes initiative. So if we were looking at the perfect scenario, it would look something like that, in my opinion, based on where we've seen success.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rollins, did you have another question?
No, not a question, just a comment. And kind of to answer in response to Mr. Connor's question, we put this on the agenda just because it came up and we thought that people were interested enough to have a presentation, but also because I do think it's a long lead time, and so the sooner we get, if we're thinking about doing it, the sooner we come to some consensus that yes, we think we'd like to do it, the more planning can go into it and the more likely it's going to be successful. I mean, I think it would be suicide to try to hit the first target deadline here of the April 6, 2021 election. But, you know, if you look at the March 15th, 2022, that would give us a year to at least test the waters, develop a plan, roll something out before we even have to pass a resolution in December of next year. Conventional wisdom.
You're probably going to have to move closer to your mic. Yeah.
Conventional wisdom on something like this is that you tend to do better, or conventional wisdom is you want to get it on the ballot in an off cycle, not in a November election. So if we were interested in doing something like this, I think we'd probably be looking at the March 15th, 2022. And hopefully, you know, hopefully the economy's recovered by then.
Yeah. Can I ask if, to our knowledge, has any other district within the county brought this up? Has there been any interest or any discussions with any other school bodies?
So we floated this trial balloon, I can't remember how many years ago, 4 years ago? And the other districts were definitely interested. And when we had a little meeting, an informational meeting in this room, and there were representatives of other districts here for that.
So there is some, if you will, precedent for this discussion. This wouldn't be essentially out of the blue for most of the other districts.
And I'd be happy to canvass the other regional superintendents to have them talk to their boards and get back to the board.
Okay, that'd be
Regional
great.
superintendent meetings are usually good to just pose the question to see what the interest level is.
That'd be great, thank you.
Ms. Yar just sent me a link to current sales tax rates by city around Illinois, which I think she should just send to all of you. And actually, there are a lot of cities in Illinois that have much higher sales tax rates than we do right now.
Really?
In fact, on this list, we are towards the bottom of the scale.
Well, are most of the higher ones in the collar counties or elsewhere?
They're not all in the collar counties. Let's see, I'm trying to
I just forwarded that to everyone.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just got it.
Although a lot of them are, you know, the highest ones, as you might expect, are in the Chicago area, but Springfield is 9 3/4. Tinley Park's up there. A lot of these are in the collar counties. Champaign is 9. Decatur's 9 1/4.
How about like Bloomington?
Bloomington is 8 3/4.
Okay.
8.
Yeah, and all of those cities that you just mentioned, Tim, Champaign, Springfield, and Decatur all do have the school sales tax.
I guess my comment is if we took the 1%, we'd get about $15 million roughly. it sounds like, at 62% of the 26 million or whatever. And I know that that will not solve all of our facilities needs, but I guess the advantage would be that you wouldn't have to have additional bonds for that amount, or you could reduce property taxes, like she said, so.
Yeah, if you can recall from that facilities condition assessment, our annual needs that we had from that presentation was around $20 million.
Okay.
And Mr. Phillips is here if he wants to speak to that, but that's about what it was.
Okay. Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, so actually it's above 25 million a year annual spend to stay, in pacing with our current facilities condition.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Ann or Michelle? Okay, thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you for your time tonight. You guys have a great holiday.
All right, thanks, Ann.
Bye-bye.
Any other follow-up items from the committee of the whole, Mr. Rollins, on
No.
yours?
No.
Okay. Mr. Siegel, any comments that you want to follow up on your items from committee of the whole?
I do. I believe that first we're going to have a student attendance boundary realignment presentation.
Okay.
And I was told that Rob Schwartz would be here.
Correct. Rob Schwartz from RSP is joining us. He's on the screen now.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you hear me loud and clear.
We can.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to hit the highlights. I think Mike did a wonderful job. I got into your meeting late as you guys rescheduled from Tuesday to Monday because of the election. So I was able to hear most of his. So I'm going to keep this at a higher level and focus on some of the things that I heard that were comments or questions and how we've adapted this presentation to be able to address those particular elements. Anywhere that I have on this presentation where there's red, that's where I added something to help give clarification to how we got to the point of what these recommendations are from RSP for elementary and middle school boundaries. So in this case, item number 10, we're following your district policy 7.3 for student assignment and intra-district transfer. I'll show you what that looks like for these particular option at the elementary and middle school. Here on this slide, what we're showcasing is how that looks. So where we have current, so if we look at let me turn my pointer option on. If we look at this first row here in 2021, this is the current boundaries. And then when we look in 21-22, you can see the 5th grade with the areas that change would be in their current boundary. And next year, 7th and 8th graders would be in their current boundary. And then you can see how that starts to play out where for elementary, it takes 1 year to have the boundaries reflect based on policy 7.3. And for the middle school, that takes 3 years for that to occur. So here's just kind of the notes of how that works. We also made comment to this, how we got to the enrollments, whether it was TBE students, TPI students, the special programming students, and Kappa, how all that impacted how, when we made different changes, whether it was at the elementary or middle school, there were different impacts by those geographic areas with the known students that may elect to be in those programs. What I'm sending to Mike in lieu of some of the time so you can get on to many of your other items are how your facility master plan had many changes that went into play, because I think there was a comment, we're always changing elementary boundaries. Well, it went back to what you see with these bullet points here, that as programs or buildings went offline and as the 2 new buildings came online, we had some planned changes that occurred in different areas. And so when you see that video, you'll see over time how those boundaries were impacted as we tried to plan for those elements. Now, one thing that did change in our process was between the last time that we set out on this facility master plan and what you're seeing tonight for the second time for a change in the elementary and middle school boundaries was you as a district, we conducted an audit of the functional capacity of your buildings. So if you go back the last time we presented to you, we showcased what those changes were in the district and how that relates better to how the bilingual strands work in your buildings, how we really utilize the spaces, whether it's core space, elective space, or other program space. So those really are some major changes in why we looked at things a little bit different in this go around. This gets to the recommended plan that I think Mike highlighted really well with the areas that are changing are in the blue and black area. So again, our focus was on areas that were in Westview, here on the northwest side of your district. We have too many kids at Brookview, and we had too many kids at Riverdale. And so the blue-black areas represent areas that changed. The solid colors represent what they changed to in this recommended plan. Information that was presented to you last time is shown here on page 11, so you can see what the current situation was for these buildings and why we were recommending what it would look like, and then how it related to those best planning practice items. What changed from last time was how we played through, in this case for the elementary, the fifth graders that would be impacted by the elementary boundary change. So fourth graders this year, well, with the data, because we're waiting for the 2021 data to be finalized, we're looking at 1920 data, which would be third graders, and how that would be played out when the boundary change goes into play for 21-22. Those kids that would be able to stay in their current boundary. Now that we have the 2021 data, we'll work with the district on the absolute number of current fourth graders that are impacted, but it's going to be very similar. So again, trying to take your grandfathering 7.3 board policy for intra-transfers, how does that play out? And you can see we are able to have all these buildings within the functional capacity for each of these facilities. We're showing you a breakdown by grade of what it is if there was no grandfathering. So this is new information. And then this is what it would be with the grandfathering. And this takes into account choices that are made with the TBE, TPI, Kappa, all special programming, all of those elements to get at the number of students that likely would be in these buildings. And what we're saying is year 2 of the projections that we had put in place. We also last time had this slide of the students that would be impacted by the boundary change. In this case, it was, since it's 1920 data, it was the kindergarten through third grade students. And you can see from the table, the left-hand side is the school attendance area that they reside in. And then as we move to the right, what they would be recommended in the plan. So we can see that there's 53 students from Brookview that would go to Gregory. This was K through 3 students. Well, with this board policy, we're looking at the 1920 data. We're actually looking at just kindergarten through second grade students because of how it plays out. So we have fewer students that are impacted. Again, we'll verify all of this with the 2021 data as we move into analyzing that information. But again, trying to help everything follow what your board policy is. Here we have the current middle school attendance areas, and then what's proposed in this recommended plan. Some of the bigger elements that happen is we have Rolling Green, where it changes from Flynn to Lincoln. That's why it's in this red color. We have this area that's was in RISA. It's coming now into Lincoln, and this corresponds with the Constance Lane area. So we expanded that boundary. One question that came up last time was, we're not changing anything with the high school. And our directive was to look at elementary and middle school based on where we were seeing overutilization, and how can we realign based on the TBE, TPI, special programs, and Kappa. How do we realign some of these elementary and middle school boundaries to help some of that overcrowding? So we weren't looking at high school. The capacities at the high school are really tight. In this area that I have labeled with RESA, there's about 100 high schoolers that currently, with the 1920 data, reside within that blue-black line. So we would have to look at some other changes at the high school to just make a complete feeder from now the new middle school boundary for Lincoln that has the difference between Jefferson and East. We have to do some other examination. So we've talked about that in general with administration. So as we look at the numbers, one of the things that we showed you back on November 2nd, you see here the current situation and how we have too many kids at RESA and what that recommended plan was prior to applying the 7.3 board policy. When we look at what that impact is, one of the things that we worked with administration is we don't get the change that we needed as quickly at RESA. It's a delayed impact, and you can see that staggering as we look at this by year. Everything's going to correspond to what we showed previously in 23, 24, and 24, 25, because the boundary change is fully in place for the middle school at that time. So you can see next year we're over 1,100 kids at RESA Middle. We're going to be really full still, but less than what we would currently have if we didn't make the change, and definitely more kids than if we did no grandfathering. But we have to follow board policy 7.3, so this is the way the numbers would play out. If we look at that in detail for year 2, what you start to see with RESA Middle School with those changes, you can see we start to have a smaller 6th grade class, and we have larger 7th and 8th grade classes to give us this 1162. And why Lincoln Middle, you can also see the opposite. We start to have a larger 6th grade class with smaller 7th and 8th grade classes. So I think I show year 3 as well. So we can now start to see that impact of, again, in year 3, the smaller RESA 6th and 7th grade starts to get us closer to 1,000 students. And if I showed year 4, the projections, we get out to what that number is wholesale with the number of students by school building. We do show, again, what was presented on November 2nd with the students that were impacted by the boundary change. But because that is different, we only are moving what would be new 6th graders in the 21-22 school year. We're looking at the 4th grade students, because again, it's 2 years back with the 1920 data. You can see we have significantly fewer students that are impacted where they currently reside and where in the recommended plan they ultimately would land in this scenario. Again, just 6th graders, but the 1920 4th grade students. Again, I highlighted some of the changes that we have in this graphic of how we start to align things a little bit differently. I mentioned the Rolling Green change, where they changed from Flynn to Lincoln as a complete feeder. Mentioned the Riverdale, where they will completely align with RESA. And then the all of Froberg goes to Flynn. So those are the big changes to be able to get the right number of students, and the right number of students based on how we're seeing the trends with those program choices of TBE, TPI, Kappa, and special programming. And just another visual of that. So that should capture everything that maybe were questions from the last meeting. I open up for other comments or questions. Lots of additional work once the board approves what this is. We have some of these things listed that get into the communication of what the district needs to do for these families and students that are impacted, as well as things that will be visuals on your website, the web address locator tool, but would be happy to entertain questions. If I can answer them, I will tonight. If not, I'll get with Mike and he can address the committee with those appropriate responses.
Hey, Ken, this is Jude.
Jude?
So can this gentleman give us the current slide deck? Because what's on board docs is the old one. There's none of the, it's not the updated one from 11/24. Those numbers don't match what I'm looking at on mine, and they don't have all the red notation. So I don't know if Laura didn't receive it or whatever, but could she kind of forward that?
Yeah, we can forward this. I think just here today, we updated with all the visuals to help with what we updated and how that relates to what you may have previously seen and what is now being shown to answer those questions about who's impacted by the district transfer board policy 7.3 and so on.
So the ones that my other question then is Jefferson, I'm sorry, the Lincoln piece, some will go to Jefferson, some go to East, right? That we don't have a clear or a clean feeder there, correct?
Correct. They would remain where they currently are. We're not changing it. And that goes back to the high school functional capacities. And with all the high schools being really full, moving 100 students from Jefferson into East is problematic. We'd have to do some other examination of other changes that could clean up some of the boundaries as we go from middle school to high school.
But you're saying that we are already currently dividing the Lincoln students between Jefferson and East.
That would be something new because of the realignment of Constance Lane into Lincoln and so on. So we're not doing anything to the high school boundaries, just elementary and middle school.
Never mind.
Okay, I have a comment. You know, no matter what we do with zones, somebody's not going to be happy, and they're going to let us know, and they're going to let Dr. Jarrett know. So, but I think it's very logical what is being recommended here to try to balance out where we're really overcrowded. And you can look at Risa and Riverdale as probably the two schools that were, you know, near capacity and where we've got to do something there. This is, Mike, I think this is a question for you. And I'll just say this change would add about 200 students to Lincoln. And Lincoln has the capacity for adding that number. The part that concerns me is traffic flow. On 12th Street and 2nd Avenue is a nightmare today with 500 students going there when we're in normal session. So it concerns me that we're going to, now I know not all 200 are going to be dropped off by their parents. They're going to, many are going to come by buses, and there's a different route for that. But the 12th Street is the way that all the parents and grandparents drop their kids off, and adding a lot more students there concerns me that we might have to do something about traffic flow or pickup and drop off by parents at Lincoln. We don't have that issue at Risa, because we got a lot of land out there, and Lincoln is kind of landlocked, and there's not, I mean, we've done a little bit of demolition of homes there or whatever, but it concerns me about traffic flow, that this could create additional problems for the faculty at Lincoln to try to safely coordinate drop off and pick up at Lincoln. That's just a comment. Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a comment, but I don't know that there's any way to solve it, but you know, I look at the overutilized schools and I think to myself, this is the market at work. And so people send their kids, they choose houses, they send their kids to schools that they feel comfortable sending their kids to. And this analysis, one of my concerns is this analysis just acts as if you can pick up those kids and move them to a different school that parents may not be as enamored with. That might have lower performance. And then we just assume that those parents are going to send their kids to school there. It'd be interesting to go back to the last time we did this and see if we saw any of that. If we saw people moving back into more desirable zones because of that. If we saw people leaving the district and sending their kids to private school because of that. Do you take any, I'm really asking the RSP person this more than anything, do you ever look at that and take any of that into account in your predictive modeling?
Yeah, great question. And two parts to that answer. First is yes, we do take that into account. Everything that's built into this goes down to a planning area level. So the type of development, is it single family apartments, townhomes, mobile homes? The second piece is we every year are looking at what I would call intra-transfers of people that are moving around in your district, and it might be related to maybe they're renters, maybe they're moving up and making different choices in what their house is. But we can definitely go back in time and really hone in on some of the places where we did boundary changes, and did we see specific moves where, let's say they were in Riverdale, we changed Riverdale's boundary, and did they find a way to move back into Riverdale? So we absolutely can do that, and that might be just a good examination to be able to say, hey, when you're making these boundary changes, what potential type of impact could happen with those changes based on a family choice.
I think that would be interesting, an interesting analysis, and also whether people choose in some of these instances to pull their kids out of the district altogether and send them. You know, really, we need to get to the point where everybody views all schools as viable options, but we aren't there yet. And so I'm a little concerned about this, and that this is why we end up having to go back and revisit school boundaries more than once every 10 years. Is we can draw the lines and tell people, well, you need to send your kids to this school over here, but if they're not comfortable sending their kids to that school, they're going, the schools where they're comfortable sending their kids are likely to always be oversubscribed. And the ones that they're not comfortable sending their kids to are going to have over capacity. And that really ought to be telling us something, to be honest. Mm-hmm. This is just a really high level, and it's probably more has to do with high schools, which I know isn't really part of this. But given the wonderful news we've had with Rockford Promise, anecdotally, I've already heard stories about people talking about moving into the district. Have we looked at our capacity levels to make sure that we're going to be able to handle that if we do see a resurgence of people coming back into the district or sending their kids to public schools?
Can you turn your mic on, Mike?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's definitely something we will need to analyze. As we did our functional building analysis, what we did find, if we look district-wide, we have plenty of capacity from a district's standard. We do have pockets, much like we're discussing tonight, that are above our functional capacity, but from a district perspective, we have space. Now, our high schools, as Mr. Schwartz mentioned, we're nearing that functional capacity, but I think we do have some abilities to work within that and make some decisions and still work within the enrollment numbers we have or could potentially have.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Connor.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Rowland's sentiment on this. I mean, people do choose neighborhoods and schools. However, I am likewise bothered by the fact that we have some schools, and I'll pick on Riverdale, which I think, if you've been there, is, from my point of view, egregious from the space standpoint. And the teachers that I've talked to feel that pressure. So, and as much as I'm agreeing with the parent side, I think that we also have to take into account the fact that some of these schools are, really at their limit. So I think in one sense, we've got to find some answers that we'll all agree to, and that's fair to the parents and all. When I looked at this, it seemed like, just on the surface, that the main goal that I saw, and I could have misunderstood, was to really relieve especially some of the major points where, there really was, again, from my point of view, over the top. And again, I have to pick on Riverdale because that's, to me, and Risa, although it's a good facility, I mean, they have their limits. I think the issue that I heard from Mr. Rollins that I think is probably the one that strikes me is that, and I don't know the algorithms and I don't know the predictive models, so I'm just going to say I really don't know that part. But in a lot of the predictive models, there's various scenarios, and so, for example, the point of, well, what if we do get a lot of people who come back in, and what does that scenario look like, over a longer period of time? I think that's a pretty rational way to look to see if there's a couple different scenarios. I mean, logistically, the district has an issue. I mean, I really, and as Mr. Scrivano said, we're not going to make everybody happy no matter what we do. But I think, one of our goals has to be what would serve the students best overall in terms of capacity, and really, you have to say it, our staff, because they're all kind of feeling that same thing. So what I think would be helpful, I'm just speaking for myself, is to have at least some, if you will, talking points, I'm sorry, I can't think of another term, where it puts in context a couple different scenarios that would kind of answer these at a high level. Because when you look at the details, I'm sure it's probably in there, but just in a way of saying, you've got, 3 basic choices, and they are the following. I think that would help me. So, for example, you might say, if we relieve, RISA, and we try to, keep viable with these other options, that means you're going to overload here. I mean, because I noticed, the movement, say, between Flynn and Lincoln and so forth. I mean, and to me, visuals are always helpful, but sometimes just the context of 1 or 2 high-level alternatives, because then it helps us boil down what our real choices are, right? And I've just, maybe nobody else is interested, but to me, that would be helpful. I know that the goal, and it's done well, is to be very, factual on all this. But I'm asking for perhaps, really alternatives on the recommendations to say, you can do 1, and the downsides are A and B, and you can do 2, and the downsides are C and D. I mean, that kind of plain talk on the recommendations at least would help me, because in the end we have to decide this. And
actually, Mike, I just want to say this is up for a vote tonight.
Oh, that's right. Shoot. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have said that ahead of time. Sorry.
But it's not, I think some of your points can be certainly information we could use.
Yeah, let me just say, God, the thing I'll say is that, is there any way to summarize some of that, based on this, or just to say, this is the only viable alternative is what's been shown.
If we take the secondary, the middle schools, for example, with RISA, what we presented, changing the boundaries so we are spreading out enrollment from RISA to Flynn and Lincoln, as we worked with our schools team and talked about comfortable enrollment numbers between Lincoln, Flynn, and RISA, a common number of around 900 students in that range. Our schools team felt that our current teachers and staff, that really was a good enrollment number. So that kind of helped in that decision-making process in that sense. Does that
Yeah, that's
answer?
the kind of thing that I think, yeah, I mean, all that tells me is that we have a target total number, but again, I'm sensitive to Mr. Rellin's issue on some of the parent side, I guess. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to wander, but I really, these are big decisions that people are going to come back to us on.
Rob, do you have anything to add to that, to the question?
Yeah, I'll do a deeper dive in the map too. I didn't go there because I knew you had spoke about it last time, but these are great questions, and definitely this is important for the messaging that the parents get. I'm always going to come back to page 5. So if you go back to when we last set all this up with the facility master plan, we came up with these best planning practices to try to help steer the ability to have a recommendation for whatever the boundary change would be impacting, whether it was elementary, middle school, or high school. So we tried, in this case, our focus was where we had too many kids, and ideally we were trying to move them where there was underutilization of buildings. So we didn't want to do a move where we moved some kids to one building and then kids that were in that building moved to another building. So things that succinctly made sense. We had the over capacity issues at RESA. We really tried to focus on where there could be walkability. So this came into where the facilities were located, how close certain type of students were that would ultimately be in that building, because we have some of these other programs like the TBE, special programming, and Kappa. We wanted to have contiguous attendance areas because that starts to help with some of our transportation goals of minimizing having buses crisscrossing each other. We wanted to reduce the number of splits, or ultimately eliminate any splits that were occurring from elementary school to middle school. So some of that got cleaned up a little bit better in this RESA area when I go back to a map. We ultimately didn't want to move very many students. This gets into the multiple moves that may sometimes happen when we start to look at some of these options that we were looking toward. Everything went back to those planning projections we had at those planning areas. We wanted to utilize the existing transportation network, and the question about Lincoln and now having more people that go to Lincoln. Well, when I go to the map, we had limits on where do we move these kids if there's too many students at RESA, and we're really close at Flynn. Do we start jumping over Lincoln to go to other places? Well, we had space at Lincoln, so it became a natural thing again to try to make sure we're utilizing our transportation network. We wanted to, again, minimize some of these negative transportation situations. So somewhat similar to A, but then also, how do we have these intra-transfers? So that was the general things that we really tried to make these boundaries, and why I was showing what it historically was and how that matched up with all the program changes, buildings that came online, buildings that came offline. That then gets us to this recommendation. So if we look at where my pointer is, this is where Riverdale is, right? Really close to 20. But most of the kids are up in this core area. And so, again, trying to keep the areas that were close. 20 becomes a natural barrier. So we had space that was down in Froburg. So we were able to move some kids there. When we come up to Lathrop here on this northwest, we were able to move some kids over to Lathrop because we have the ability for students to fit in those particular areas. Constance Lane, we're looking at, if we started showing you the layers of data, and let me pull up a map so you can kind of see some of this, because really, to get into this large map, hopefully this didn't crash my computer. I've been having issues with this map. So we're just showing you the high-end map in the presentation. But when we started out, we had these reside projections, so we knew the number of kids that were in any given area, down to this planning area. So what we currently had, then when we factored out students that will make the TBE school choice, we start to see what that impact is. And then at the elementary with the special programs, we get to the point of the number of kids that we feel will be here based on the trends of choices of TBE and special programs. And we wanted to make sure that we had enough flexibility that if, let's say, more students didn't choose TBE or the special programs, they decide to stay in the school based on where this boundary is now reflecting they should go to school, that we have some flexibility, that we're not going to be in a situation that, hey, you know what, there's some more kids that we need to slice out and move either to Lathrop or Froburg, and so, or more into Constance Lane, or maybe we move too much into Constance Lane. We can talk about this with any of the specific areas, but those were generally, we try to use the data to guide us and get at reasonable recommendations with the choices parents are already making, specifically with the special program choices, definitely with the TBE. So again, trying to match up what we have with bilingual strands, the monolingual strands, really set these students up, set the teachers up with the ability to have some flexibility. That's the elementary. Let me stop there and I can come back with the middle school questions.
Any other comments or questions before we call the question?
Yeah,
Go
it's Jude. I think at the end of the day, what we have to remember is objectivity as board members is, from a legal perspective, we can't be looking to gerrymander boundaries so that it, I don't know, we all have our own sub-districts or we all have whatever, but this was done objectively with the multi-layers of information and the least movement necessary for students. And so as much as I feel for the families who will result in a change in their boundary, and perhaps they did buy a house hoping that they'd go to one school over another, but years ago when we came and put this policy together, we said we would grandfather in, hopefully we'll take care of the students who are there, but I'm not going to question the boundaries or hope that you give us choices, because I think that the process was done correctly and objectively and in the fairest way possible. So thank you for your work on that.
Okay, I will ask if there is a motion to approve item A, the student attendance boundary realignment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Siegel. Any further questions or comments or discussion? Not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8A, the student attendance boundary realignment.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Stanford?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, Mr. Siegel, any other items under your responsibility?
All right. I'll go pretty fast because at the committee of the whole next week, I'll be doing a more complete presentation. I did have the chance to meet with McGuire Woods last Tuesday, and I gave them 6 points to talk about. The top one was evidence-based funding. The second one was capital funding. Just to let you know, the other 4 were unfunded mandates, what are barriers to academic progress that are legislative in nature, early childhood funding, and over-testing. I did leave those questions with them, and I am going to get more information from them, but not in time for the next committee of the whole meeting, so I will give a more rich information next week on the first 2. For the time being, as far as the evidence-based funding goes, I was told to leave out certain political statements, so I'm just going to...
Okay.
That evidence-based funding is unlikely to grow robustly, but the structure is fairly well ensures that it will continue on at least at a flat rate. We just don't know what the change of administrations is going to do as far as evidence-based funding, but there are a couple of federal components to the evidence-based funding model. So we kind of have to wait and see what happens with the new administration as far as that goes. But for the time being, they felt very confident that we could depend on at least a flat level of evidence-based funding and not have to worry too much about that going away. Facility funding is kind of in the same boat. Just a lot of questions. It's a timing thing right now as far as what they're going to be able to put together. Unfortunately, it's just something that we're going to know more about later. That go. And then as far as the Speakers Bureau or Listeners Bureau, however you want to think about that, I've had a couple of pretty good conversations this morning. I met with Mel Gilfillan of the REA, and he and I have agreed to work with HR to essentially have joint recruiting efforts, work on positive messaging. Mr. Gilfillan and I, and as well as Chad Anderson, are working with the National Equity Project, and we have decided that it would be ideal if our messaging could be created with or through a lens of equity, because we feel that it's important to make some strides in this area. I also talked to Mr. Connor. We have yet to decide exactly what sort of group we're going to talk to, but he does have some good messaging. He and I will sit down and figure out what criteria we use to determine who we contact, but his primary messaging that he's feeling pretty prepared to address would be vocational programs, arts programs, and technology. Possible groups that we have considered would be the Rockford Area Association of Realtors, social clubs like the Kiwanis would certainly be good groups to reach out to. Obviously, with pandemic, the format of the meeting is going to be a little bit up in the air. But this gives us the opportunity to start building messaging and be prepared once opportunities do arise. More next week.
Thank you. I do not have any announcements, but just that the follow-up on the governance committee, we will be presenting, it'll be attached to your agenda for the next committee of the whole, which is next Tuesday. The draft of the new board member onboarding guide. It's kind of long, so I'm giving you a heads up. You all have it. I've sent it to you, but I just would like you to critique it and take a look at it. This is a really important thing. Whenever you have a change in the people in the seats for board members, the dynamics change, and you've got to bring them along to catch them up to where we're at, and this is a critical piece of their orientation. So please take a look at it and see if there's any obvious things that we have forgotten, or things that we want to word differently or whatever. So that will be on the agenda for our committee of the whole meeting. So we are now on to the consent portion of our meeting, which includes the items previewed by the board committee chairs during the committee of the whole. These items are under number 10, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, monthly cash and investment report for October of 2020, financial results for October of 2020, the fiscal year 2021 first quarter treasurer's report, the RFP for the administration building AV upgrades, the construction bid pay request log, the RPS managed work change order logs, the recurring contract for Rockford Park District, and the consent agenda items for the governance committee, the meeting minutes of November 10th, contract purchase orders, the MOU with Rockford Education Association, and the Freedom of Information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the consent items.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we are now at the closed session consent agenda, including the following: the appointment of Anne Marie Weiserick as the 10-month middle school assistant principal at Lincoln Middle School, the appointment of Jennifer Speaks as a 10-month high school assistant principal at Jefferson High School, the appointment of Michael Phillips as a 12-month chief operations officer, the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session items, also including the 4 EIAs for students 8195, 8200, 8201, and 8202. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session agenda items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Are there any closed session items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the closed session consent items.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel,
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Ms. Stanford,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins.
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, we're now on to board member action steps. I have 2 items that I've listed, and they are a reminder for board members to prep for the Monday, November 30th meeting that we're having, interviewing the candidates for board seat sub-district A. So you have been sent all of the applications and the resumes, so please review those and be prepared. And then review the onboarding guide that I've sent you for new board members for their orientation. Anything else that needs to be added to that list? Okay. There are no further comments or agenda items by the board. I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 8:37.